The decision was made as naturally as the seed of an ancient plant that knows it must grow toward the sun. Just like that, the two wanderers understood they had to keep heading west, where the pale star hides from the night, creating a faint spectacle of poor, lazy colors on the horizon. Without food, dirty water, filters, vaccines, protective goggles, hats, or full clothing, they trudged forward as if to prove to higher powers that they were capable of miracles. In their case, every step, every meter conquered was a miracle. The path was arduous, exhausting, and soaked in malevolence. The banshees, those wraiths that linger between life and death, were no longer just black dots on the peaks of the dunes. They circled around them like vultures over carrion before it truly turns into dead meat. They made awful sounds, like the choking roar of an engine before it explodes. As they drew closer, the banshees tempted them with the prospect of a gentle, painless death, one that would free them from this wretched journey across the endless crimson ocean. More than once they brushed against their tired bodies, testing how close they were to the edge of life. But it wasn't just the banshees haunting these eternal wanderers. To the north, tornadoes gathered, dancing together, pairing up to bore tunnels into the hardened earth. They combined in threes and fours, tearing the surface apart, scattering the red dust in all directions, creating crimson fountains. As the swelling on Carmen's face subsided, her skin became covered in scabs, scars, and the salty traces of dried tears. She had become so much like the desert landscape that it was hard to tell her once smooth cheeks from the dead steppe, steeped in death and despair.
It's not far now,
She kept telling herself, lying with each step just to take another one. She waited for the moment when her legs would give out, and she'd fall rather than voluntarily lie down on the scorching sand to end her suffering. She longed for this misery, this pain, this cacophony of agony to finally fade into oblivion. But she did nothing to cut short her suffering. Like the hero from a child's tale, she kept pushing her boulder up the mountain, despite all the hardships fate threw at her. She refused to give the hermits the satisfaction of a passive surrender to death. She wanted to leave with her head held high and to accompany the mysterious man to the very end of her life. In this brief period filled with sorrow and misfortune, they had grown closer than she could have imagined. They were more than lovers. Their souls had been bound together by a journey that no one, good or evil, should ever have to undertake. The nameless man, driven by his own shortcomings, also trudged forward with great difficulty. It was getting harder and harder for him to catch his breath through his cracked, bloodied lips. His throat was parched, and his mouth was filled with red sand. He remembered dragging the woman on makeshift sleds for several days, leaving him in a pitiful state. Every few minutes, he lost his balance, teetering on the edge of collapse. He no longer had that glint in his eyes, that grim, brooding eloquence, or the masculinity etched into his face. Instead, he resembled a convict who had spent his entire life in a penal colony, beaten and humiliated by guards. He was weak and frail, thin, wiry, and every exhale sounded like nails scraping against a chalkboard. In moments of weakness, it was Carmen who helped him, taking him by the arm as they moved together through the desert plains. They spent hours this way, under the sun, where their tattered clothes failed to shield their wounded skin from its merciless rays. From a distance, they looked like two drunken friends, bouncing off invisible walls. All that was missing were pitiful songs, cheap wine tasting of sulfur, street prostitutes eager for easy money, and guards patrolling the cobblestone streets of the empire. They interspersed these moments of torment with conversations about trivial matters, counting the stops, wondering if the next one would be their last. But there was always another moment, another second, another minute, another hour. Time stretched endlessly, like an elastic band,
Do you remember your childhood?
Carmen asked, wiping sweat from her forehead during one of these stops. They sat on a hot mound of sand, surrounded by shifting dunes.
Now you want to ask me about my childhood? I've heard that your entire life flashes before your eyes when you die, but I've never heard of this kind of interpretation.
You're avoiding the question.
The young woman observed.
And I have my reasons.
Really? You're going to avoid sensitive topics now? Surely you don't think we'll survive this journey, and I'll be able to reveal your secret.
When did you become a pessimist?
Since I met you,
The words struck the man like venom. The moment Carmen finished her sentence, she realized she had said something deeply wrong. She had changed beyond recognition since leaving the Empire's capital. When she crossed the stone border of the metropolis, she was a joyful, hopeful young woman who believed that with strength of character and determination, she could forge her own path in the furnace of life. But after years of wandering, after fighting against adversity and the darkness lurking in every human soul, she had become like the nameless man. People say that travel broadens the mind, and Carmen had hoped that this long, arduous journey would open her eyes to new horizons. She was certain she would see the beauty of this world and be convinced that finding the evergreen valley was worth it to save a dying land. Today she was no longer so sure.
I'm sorry.
She said quietly, letting him know she regretted her earlier words. Her companion merely waved his hand, as if her bitter comment hadn't affected him.
It's nothing.
But I really...
You have nothing to apologize for. You worry too much about words. Words are like bullets. They can hurt, but only if fired from the right perspective. Look around you. Do you really think one comment can touch me when deadly grains of sand swirl around us? The last thing you should do now is apologize for anything. It's too late for that. Now, we have to accept what's been hanging over us for so long.
You mean death?
Death and despair still have their time to come. I'm talking about the fact that a person can never fully understand all the mysteries surrounding them.
Are you saying you've forgotten your own childhood?
And do you remember all of your childhood, or just the fragments that stuck in your mind and over the years turned into a bleak lie? I remember more dreams. Sometimes I dream of a tree growing on a step, covered in white blossoms that rise into the air at the slightest breeze, creating a floating carpet of delicacy. I see through a haze valleys from which the first cities rise, full of greenery and clear water. Sometimes when I look at the sky, it seems alive, blue, azure, and the pale sun shines in shades of lemon and orange.
Your dreams are beautiful.
They're nightmares. They show me a world I could never experience because I was born after the war.
The war changed the world.
The war only stamped the changes that humanity had been implementing for hundreds of years. But to avoid a gloomy atmosphere, I have a dream, one so real that sometimes I wish I could believe in it. Perhaps after death, that's where I'll end up. Who knows what awaits us on the other side?
Will you tell me about it?
I can't answer the question about my childhood, so consider this a form of compensation.
I'm all ears.
The man took a deep breath, as if about to reveal his greatest secret. Perhaps it wasn't truly a secret, but it was something he had never shared with anyone before. Now, with the crimson, furious guillotine hanging above them, he decided he could spare a few moments to share his precious dream.
I am merely a little boy. That's how I see myself in the face of this mighty mountain. I stand at its base, all alone, but instead of feeling loneliness, I feel gratitude for this moment of respite in this chaotic world. It's a world that fills me with joy and excitement. In my mind, images of the most diverse landscapes swirl, green lands crossed by dozens of crystal-clear rivers where wild animals live and die. I don't know their names. They seem strange and extraordinary to me. Some have long necks, others have their heads adorned with thick beards resembling crowns of kings. In the distance, in the depths of this majestic landscape, I sense the presence of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of trees rustling in the wind. The air around me smells fresh. There's no stench of coal smoke, industrial fumes, or the odor of the streets. It's blissful and serene. In this scene, I gaze up at the mountain, whose peak rises before me like a white monument. It's tall, steep, all-powerful. It towers over me and the ground I tread on every day. Dark clouds gather around it, hurling lightning. When I touch its sharp, razor-like rocks, I feel neither fear nor anxiety. My limbs tremble with respect, as if I've found a long-lost kindred spirit. My thoughts swell with excitement. I can become whole. I take on the challenge and begin my ascent. It's a painstaking, arduous journey, full of sacrifices. I leave bloody marks as the jagged rocks cut into my boyish skin, but I feel no pain. Suffering or the bitterness of failure is foreign to me. I am free from flaws. When I finally reach the summit and can admire the beauty of the entire landscape, I am overwhelmed with the joy of discovering new places that stretch out on the horizon. On the map of my mind, I mark each destination I should reach. I am an explorer. I am invincible. In this one singular moment, I am a god.
A beautiful dream.
said Carmen when the nameless man finished his story.
So you're a god?
That's how I imagine gods if they were ever with us. But looking at our world, climbing the highest mountain, they would only see pain and suffering. Maybe it's better that they're not here. It makes no difference whether they were real or not. This world wasn't made to be admired.
A few days ago, I wouldn't have agreed with you.
And today,
Today, I'd say only one thing. If this world is so vile, so cruelly wicked, then why do we keep moving forward? What drives us?
do you know the answer?
The red-haired beauty laughed softly, revealing in her smile 2 missing teeth, which must have fallen out when she hit the hard ground during that unforgettable, fierce storm.
What made you laugh?
The man asked, intrigued.
I just realized that I don't know the answer. I have no idea why we keep going, enduring this torment. We could lie down here, close our eyes, and wait. We probably wouldn't have to count the minutes long before the desert swallowed us. And yet we keep moving. We keep moving.
Maybe we move because we don't know the answer. Maybe if we did, we wouldn't take up the challenge.
You're probably right.
Perhaps we'll never solve this mystery. But I do know one thing. I've caught my breath. We can keep going, to lift our spirits. Let's see where we end up, where our stubborn hearts lead us. Let's test ourselves in this eternal chase for happiness.
This isn't a story filled with sudden twists. There's little room here for mystical magic, frenzied chases, or heroes battling against fate. It's a dull, painful journey under the scorching sun, a slow, arduous trek through freezing nights, a tale of survival, suffering, and acceptance of the inevitable. So it's no wonder that the path taken by the protagonists turns into a monotonous blend of sadness, regret, and relentless endurance. It's difficult to inject anything interesting into this monotony of despair when days and nights pass by unnoticed. The gray shades blend into a single moment, a blur where no one counts steps, minutes, hours, or days anymore. No one remembers what happened after that fateful conversation about the mountain from the dream, when the ominous wind arose and the wailing banshees, which had foreshadowed this moment since the beginning of the journey, finally arrived. First came the unbearable cough, but as is often the case with a cough, no one took it seriously. Just an innocent symptom that couldn't possibly herald disaster. Yet when a person starts coughing up blood and spasms grip their exhausted body, the cough becomes something more. It turns into a symbol, a cruel, brutal harbinger of doom, which struck when her limp body collapsed onto the hot surface of the sand. The nameless one watched as Carmen, the daughter of Adam Phoenix, fell lifelessly, without any resistance. Half-conscious, she writhed like a rat thrown into boiling oil, her limbs twisting in ways that were hard to comprehend. For a moment, she regained consciousness, even though vile foam mixed with blood appeared on her lips. She tried to fight, to scream, but her blue lips and swollen throat distorted the sounds. Her desperate attempts to communicate were incomprehensible. Despite the lack of water in her body, tears welled up in her eyes. Is this how it ends? She thought.
You can't give up now. Do you understand, Carmen? You can't.
The nameless one rushed to his dying companion, holding her frail body in his weak arms. His actions said it all. Even knowing that death is inevitable, a person is never truly ready for it. Always, regardless of how many years they've lived or how well they knew someone, the time they had felt insufficient.
Go on, find that valley. Find it.
Carmen whispered before losing consciousness. For the world, 2 hours passed, but for her, it was just a moment. At first, she thought this was death, but as she smelled her own sweat and saw the shadow of a figure leaning over her, she knew she had returned to the living. She was terrified by that fact. She didn't want to live through her death again. It was an agonizing, raw, and horrific moment. Only when darkness fell could she rest. Why did she have to come back? Why was fate so cruel?
You have to get up.
She heard a male voice. She recognized it and felt anger that her savior hadn't left her to her fate.
You have to get up.
He repeated, emotionless.
Leave me. I've had enough. Do you hear me? I've had enough. I don't want any more pain, this suffering. I just want to rest.
The man leaned closer, gazing at her with large, understanding eyes, as if peering into her soul. For a moment she feared he was a product of her dying mind. He had the same bruises, scars, and cuts she remembered, but there was something different about him, something elevated. Was fate mocking her? Was it truly this cruel? She couldn't answer those questions.
You have to get up.
Why? Why are you so cruel not letting me go?
I don't have the strength to carry you anymore, and there's something you need to see.
Carmen looked behind her and saw a trail winding into the depths of the desert. All this time, her savior, this mysterious stranger, her hero, had dragged her along when she was unconscious. Now, he insisted she stand and fight against the acceptance of her own death. What could be so important, so significant, that she was supposed to reject it now?
Listen.
I don't understand.
Try to disconnect from the world you know and just listen. Find that one seemingly insignificant sound and immerse yourself in it. Find the strength to stand. You have to keep going.
She still didn't understand this cruel request, having already made peace with her death. What could be more important than this defining step? To help her, the Nameless One placed his dusty, bloodied hand over her eyes, forcing her to focus on her surroundings. She discovered nothing significant. She could only hear her shallow, uneven breathing and her barely beating heart, which seemed weary from pumping thickened blood deprived of essential water. As she listened more intently to the sounds around her, she began to pick up the whistling air escaping from her weak lungs, coming from a short distance. The rustling of the gentle, for desert standards, wind in her imagination transformed into the image of sand particles tumbling across the cursed land, joyfully hopping on the backs of dunes. Amidst these sounds, a sudden murmur struck her, something entirely different, unique, something she had never experienced before. Was it the engine of a small automobile, or perhaps a train crossing the steppes in the distance? No, that would be too simple. It was something unfamiliar, something that made her uneasy. She shivered, filled with emotion, like a balloon about to burst.
What is that sound?
She asked, uncertain.
Answer it yourself. You only need to get up and see with your own eyes.
You're cruel.
No, I'm not. And the answer is just a few steps to the west. Just be careful. You might fall.
That's impossible.
Tears rolled down her cheeks, scarred by all the cruelties of the great desert.
It's impossible.
And yet it is. That's why you have to stand and keep moving.
So it's true.
The valley exists, And that mysterious murmur you hear is nothing other than the song of the river flowing through the valley.
So close.
Carmen wept, feeling she had no strength left to continue.
No, my dear, neither close nor far, just right. Now you'll stand and finish your journey. Together we'll descend into the green valley. I've already found the path leading down. If you want to die, you'll do so, submerged in crystal clear water. So get up and walk.
Crying, sobbing, trembling from exhaustion, pain, and wounds, the young woman forced herself to fulfill that cruel request. The pain was unimaginable. The agony she felt then is indescribable. No words, no metaphors, no curses could convey the suffering, the bitterness, and the torture her body endured in that one single moment. She felt like every breath, every tiniest movement was punished in the cruelest way imaginable. She thought her heart would shatter from exhaustion, that her swollen, blackened veins would open like fresh, unhealed wounds, or that her organs, her lungs, would simply cease to function. But despite all the suffering and despair, nothing of the sort happened. Instead of horror, darkness, and fear, she saw green shimmering in the distance as she approached the edge of the plateau. She marveled at the lush grass, the tall trees densely covering the fertile land, and the many branches of a blue river cutting across the landscape. On the horizon, she saw a mountain with a snow-capped peak. But what truly caught her attention were buildings, erected by human hands, now slowly being reclaimed by nature. Before she could say anything, overwhelmed by the sight, her strength left her completely. She fell unconscious into the arms of the Nameless One,